What's up guys, this is Jeff from Sorta Healthy, and today we are finishing up our discussion on things that you should know for your NASM Certified Personal Trainer exam. If you're currently studying for your NASM Certified Personal Trainer exam, you're in the right place. My goal is to help you pass that big test and to help you to key in on some concepts that are likely to be on that big exam. So this video today is part 2 of a 2-part video series, but if you're watching this video first, no worries. Just make sure to watch part 1 at some point as well. I'll leave a link for part 1 down in the video description. And just like that, we're jumping right back into our study guide, and we'll be kicking things off with chapter 11 today. Friendly reminder, this study guide is free for all of you to download and use by going to this link in the video description. If you'd like to use this guide and you appreciate all of our free tips, all I ask is that you consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. This allows you to help support this channel, and that allows us to keep making free content to help out all fitness professionals. Thank you very much for the support, everyone. Now let's get back to studying. Okay, so chapter 11 is all about plyometrics, and we need to know the 3 parts of a plyometric exercise. And the 3 parts of a plyometric exercise are the eccentric phase, which is the deceleration or loading phase, basically when I'm lowering into position before jumping, and in my jump squat, muscles are stretching here. Then you have the amortization phase, which is also called the transition phase, and this phase represents the delay between the eccentric phase that we just talked about and the concentric phase. So the pause at the bottom of the squat jump represents that here. Then you have the concentric phase, which is the shortening phase, and this phase is like releasing a rubber band after it's been stretched. It's the part where you lift back off the ground. And you should also know which plyometric exercises go in each phase and why they go there. So you have plyometric stabilization exercises, plyometric strength exercises, and plyometric power exercises. A squat jump with stabilization is a plyometric stabilization exercise, and a tuck jump is a plyometric strength exercise. So know why each of those 2 exercises go into each of those 2 phases, and also know what phases the other plyometric exercises also go into, and have an understanding of the plyo recommendations. And this is mainly an OPT model phasing thing. You might not need to have this memorized, but it is good to know. Basically, there's a box 11.1 in your text that NASM could pull questions from, and it contains info for different plyometric exercises in each phase. In phase 1, you should do 0 to 2 plyometric exercises for 1 to 3 sets and 5 to 8 reps. Again, you probably don't have to memorize all of that stuff, but you should be able to identify correct answers in a multiple choice format. And we'll talk more about this later. So in chapter 12, review front side and back side running mechanics. Don't memorize these, but try to understand them a little bit. They appear right in the beginning of chapter 12, so read over them. The more important thing here though is to know the different speed, agility, and quickness drills and who they are appropriate for. SAQ stands for speed, agility, and quickness, and NASM loves these drills. An SAQ drill for kids is red light, green light. It's basically a sprinting drill. Know what it is in more detail as well as the other drills. Just like with core training, balance training, plyometric training, and a whole bunch of other things, you also need to know speed, agility, and quickness recommendations. Stabilization, strength, and power all have different speed, agility, and quickness recommendations. Again, it's not like you have to have all these different recommendations memorized, but it's good to review them at the very least. Alright, moving on to chapter 13, and this is a long one. You're going to get at least 1 question on general adaptation syndrome, and probably 1 question on the SAID principle. The 3 stages of the general adaptation syndrome are alarm reaction, which is your initial reaction to a stressor, which anything can be a stressor, literally picking up a dumbbell off of the ground, that can be a stressor. And your second stage is resistance development, which is your body increasing its functional capacity to adapt to the stressor. And the third stage is exhaustion. If the stressor is intolerable and continuous, eventually this will lead to breakdown or injury. Make sure you know this one. I guarantee you're going to have at least 1 question on general adaptation syndrome on your test. And the SAID principle is actually really easy. The body will adapt to the specific demands that are placed on it. That's basically all it is. So if I do a ton of bicep curls, obviously over time, gradually, I'm going to get really big biceps. Your body is really good at adapting to things, and that's really all the SAID principle is about. I haven't seen NASM test anybody on this, but the reason they call it the SAID principle is that it stands for specific adaptation to imposed demands, which me telling you that may help you remember what it is. Okay, so have an idea of the different types of specificity. In your textbook, you'll see a whole bunch of different types of specificity. Mechanical specificity is one of those. This is nothing worth memorizing, but definitely make sure you read through those different types of specificity in your textbook and know the different types of resistance training systems. This one right here, this one is worth memorizing. You will have a few questions on this. One example is the peripheral heart action system, which I did have a question about that on my exam. And the peripheral heart action system is basically a variation of circuit training where you alternate between upper body and lower body exercises, and training this way could lead to better circulation over time. Have a very good idea of all of these different systems featured in this chapter. So at the end of this chapter, just like some of the previous ones, you're going to see a whole bunch of exercises kind of featured at the end. Familiarize yourself with them and know what phases they go in. Okay, so moving on to chapter 14, and chapter 14 is the OPT model chapter. Okay, so what you really need to do in this chapter is review all these different charts enough so that you can get a multiple choice question right about anything featured here. If I were to ask you how many core exercise sets should you do in phase 1 stabilization endurance, and the choices I gave you were A, 1 to 4, B, 2 to 3, C, 5, or D, 0 to 5, what would your answer be? And I'll give you guys a few seconds to think about it. The answer is A, 1 to 4. Again, I repeat, you do not need to memorize every single thing featured in these OPT model NASM charts, but you should be able to answer multiple choice questions on the material featured. And heck, maybe memorizing them is easier for you. I don't know, it's going to depend on you. I personally memorized about half of them and then just had a good understanding of the rest. So everything we just talked about would also apply to reviewing the exercises appropriate for each phase. And you should also review the progression continuum. And we talked about this before. It's the floor to sport beam and so on and so forth thing. Yeah, it's here too. Again, know it, understand it, memorize it. It's going to be on your test. And like I said before, this is the OPT model chapter, and you're going to have OPT model questions on your final exam. Maybe memorize some of it, but try and have a pretty good understanding of all of it. Okay, moving on to chapter 15, and chapter 15 is an easy chapter. And this is nice because our last few chapters leading up to this one have contained a ton of info. Honestly, just read this one, know the different training modalities, free weights, machines, stuff like that. This chapter is really just common sense. And on to chapter 16, know the differences between youths, adults, and the elderly and their programming. And there's an emphasis here on the difference between youths and adults. And the reason the emphasis is on youths and adults is because NASM tends to ask at least one question on the exam about the difference between youths and adults when it comes to exercising. The things to know here are kids are able to perform endurance tasks pretty well. They also have decreased glycolytic enzymes compared to adults, and therefore have a decreased ability to do longer duration high intensity tasks. They also have decreased resistance to heat and humidity and environmental extremes. This chapter also dives into training recommendations for the elderly, pregnant women, and other special populations as well. Don't bother memorizing them though, just review them. And moving on to chapter 17, which is the chapter on nutrition. And honestly guys, just review this chapter pretty well. They may test you on some basic macronutrient things like how many calories are in a gram of fat, gram of carbohydrate, or a gram of protein, which in a gram of fat you have 9 calories, in a gram of carbohydrate you have 4 calories, and in a gram of protein you also have 4 calories. But really guys, just review this chapter well. You need to know this stuff to be a halfway decent trainer anyways, so learn it. The hydration stuff featured in this chapter is definitely worth focusing on a little bit extra. You will almost certainly get a question or two on your exam having to do with hydrating your clients. So know the recommended intake of water per pound of body weight loss due to sweating. I gave the answer right here at 16 to 24 ounces. That's a question that a whole bunch of people have had on their exam. But again, there are other hydration questions that they could also ask you, so just spend a little extra time reviewing the hydration recommendations from NASM. Chapter 18 is on supplements, and really all you need here is just general chapter review. I think in my final exam, I didn't actually have any questions from this chapter. However, other trainers who I talked to who also took the final NASM exam, they did get questions from this chapter on their final exam. But again, most of this stuff is just common sense, not too complicated, and kind of fun to read through, so just general review here for chapter 18. Okay, so moving on to chapter 19, know the stages of change. And some examples of that would be pre-contemplation and action. So there are other stages of change in addition to these two examples here, and make sure you know all these different stages of change pretty well, because NASM is absolutely going to ask you at least one question on them. Luckily, they're pretty easy to find and understand in your textbook. So know active listening and all those different other strategies that they talk about in your textbook. Active listening is all about showing a genuine interest in seeking a client's perspective and getting to know him or her. Still in chapter 19 here, know the different kinds of support, and an example of that would be instrumental support. The most common examples of instrumental support are tangible, practical things that help your clients kind of stick to their exercise regimen or goals. If you offer your friend a ride to the gym so that they can get to their training session, you're offering that friend some instrumental support. And know the different cognitive strategies at the end, such as positive self-talk. They're mostly common sense, but you are likely to be questioned on them, so know them. And equally important, be able to distinguish between them. NASM is likely to throw a certain scenario at you and then ask you if it's an example of positive self-talk, imagery, or psyching up, or something like that. And on to chapter 20, know the 4 P's of marketing. The 4 P's of marketing are product, price, place, and promotion. Know them and what they mean. NASM will give you a question or two on them and have a general understanding of the 10 steps to success. This is another one that you probably don't have to memorize, but you should have a good understanding of what NASM is recommending here. Many trainers that I talked to did have questions referencing these 10 steps. All right, chapter 21, moving on to the last chapter. Know what the new assessments are, like the left test, for example. These are featured in the exam pretty often. I actually had at least one question on the left test specifically. The left test, by the way, assesses agility, acceleration, deceleration, and neuromuscular control. In this test, you have clients sprint between 2 cones, side shuffle, and do a bunch of other things. Another test that you should review in this chapter would be the pro shuttle test. Just to give you another example, you probably don't have to memorize all these different assessments, but have a general idea of what they are, who they're for, and what they accomplish. And to be honest with you guys, this is another chapter just to do some general review on. They seem to kind of pull at random on this chapter, but they actually do pull quite a few questions from this last chapter, so make sure you do review it and make sure you read it all over. So for progress monitoring, what I want you to do is take each chapter quiz at least 3 times. You should be able to get at least a 90 on each of these quizzes before taking the final exam. And of course on this sheet here, you can write down your quiz scores if that's something that you're into. And now we're on to bonus studying options. So the Pocket Prep application is actually pretty good. And overall, I would recommend it. At first I thought it was kind of stupid, but after taking the final test, I was kind of like, damn, there was a whole bunch of questions that were featured on that Pocket Prep app that were actually on the final test. So yeah, because of that, and because the app is convenient, obviously you can just kind of play around with it on your phone while you're watching TV or something, yeah, I think it's worth it to get it. So I'd buy that app for 2 months, which I believe you can buy it monthly, and I would buy it and use it for the 2 months leading up to the final exam. I've answered over 500 questions on this app. It's great review for all subjects covered. Again, it's worth the purchase a few months before your big exam. So I am a flashcard guy. It's how I study. It's how I've always studied, and it works for me. And I recommend that as you're reading through all these chapters, as shown here in step 1, you create flashcards along the way. Then I think you should make even more flashcards on the things we covered with this guide, and in these 2 videos as well. I think that if you do that and then review those flashcards afterwards, you'll likely pass the big exam just from doing that. By the way, you can use physical flashcards, or an app like Quizlet, which already has thousands of NASM flashcards. On that note, I also do recommend some extra OPT model review. And you could argue that some of this is just memorization, but like I've mentioned several times in this video, I don't think you actually need to memorize all of it. But memorizing some of it did work for me, and I'm sure it would also work well for you too. To throw just another random example at you guys, you should probably know the best tempo to use in each phase. In the stabilization phase, I should use a 4-2-1 tempo. On a stability ball chest press, I'm moving the dumbbells down slowly, 4 seconds down on the eccentric, holding for 2 seconds at the bottom, which that would be the isometric point, and then pushing that weight back up in 1 second, which would be the concentric phase. And if you have no idea what I just explained to you with this random example, you need to do a lot more studying. The more OPT model stuff you can either memorize or at least be able to pick out of a multiple choice question answer bank, the better off you'll be. So make sure you go back to chapter 14 and review all those different OPT model charts. Chapter 14 does the best job of breaking them all down for you, in my opinion. As far as time frame goes, I think it's a really good idea to give yourself at least 2 to 3 months to study all of this material. Longer than that's probably even better, but don't drag things out too long. Be consistent, try and get at least an hour of studying in almost every single day. And I do think that you should be reviewing things a little bit more intensely those final weeks leading up to the final exam. Will many of you be able to study less than this and still pass? Sure. But I wouldn't leave it to chance, especially if you don't have a background in this stuff. Put in that hard work now so you can join me on this glorious personal training conquest. And I'm sounding a little bit weird now. This video has just gone on for way too long. In all seriousness though, be consistent, work really hard. You're going to regret it if you don't take this seriously. Anyways, thank you very much for watching, everyone. I really do want to wish you good luck on your NASM test. If you haven't liked the video yet or subscribed to the channel, please consider doing so because it does help the channel to grow, which does allow me to make more free content for all of you. Thanks for watching, everyone, and until next time, stay sort of healthy.